For my book report, I chose to read Mrs. Frisby and the Rats and Him. This story begins when Miss Frisby's young son Timothy catches a terrible sickness. She sets out for Mr. H's, a mouse with herbal medicine, which will be able to help poor Timothy. On her way back to her cozy cinder-block house, Miss Frisby encounters a crow named Jeremy. She helps save Jeremy from the farm cat, Dragon, and for this, he's very grateful. She then makes it back to her little home and feeds Timothy the medicine. But after about a day, Miss Frisby comes across another frightening problem. Moving day is upon the mouse family, but Timothy is nowhere near ready to leave the house. Miss Frisby fears that if they do not move to the forest and out of the garden soon, Mr. Fitzgibbon will plow up their cinder-block home and her family will die. As Miss Frisby worries about her problems, she stumbles across Jeremy. He tells her that she should go visit the old wise owl, for he would know what to do. She decides to go for her family's sake. Jeremy flies Miss Frisby to the owl. The old wise owl tells Miss Frisby to visit the rats. They will move her home to a safer spot in the garden until Timothy is well. He tells her that the rats are up to something, but no one knows what. Miss Frisby agrees and she's off to the rats. She has a bit of trouble with them at first, but then they find out she's the widow to Jonathan Frisby and open up to her. She doesn't understand why, but she goes with it. She is welcomed into the rats' lair and meets Justin, their leader, and Nicodemus. It is then that she finds out their story. Long ago, they were lab rats and were tested on as experiments. They were given injections full of DNA to make them smarter and have a much longer lifespan. It was there that they met Mr. H's and her husband, Jonathan. Jonathan was a mouse, like Miss Frisby, but he too was being given the injections. They began to be so smart that they formed a plan to escape. The night they put their plan into action, they agreed to let Jonathan and Mr. H's come along too. Once they were free, they began a very long journey. Along the way, they found tools and machines and many other things to help them survive. They also found the rose bush and Mr. Fitzgibbon's yard, which they chose to be the place for their future home. As they began to settle in there, they soon realized that they could not stay there and started to form a plan to move to a valley far away from Mr. Fitzgibbon's farm. But before they went, they agreed to help Miss Frisby. They had to move Miss Frisby's house to a safer spot in the garden before the morning, all without being eaten by Dragon. Miss Frisby and the rats formed their plan. After a long night of working, dangerous risks, and a life-threatening plot, the deed is done. A couple of days later, the rats moved to the valley and were safe forever. Miss Frisby and her children moved to the forest house once Timothy was well and lived happy and safe by the stream in their summer home. I really enjoyed this book. It inspired me to learn more about where mice actually live in the wild. Miss Frisby lived in tree roots as her cozy summer house. Wild field mice like to live in bushes, tall grass, hollow logs, and like Miss Frisby, old tree roots. In the winter, mice don't hibernate, but they usually prefer to live somewhere close to their food stash and free of humans and predators. For most mice, that means mostly the space between walls and ceilings. As for food, mice rely completely on their fall stashes for survival. Their winter diet includes bird and garden seed, pet food, garbage, and random nuts and seeds. If the food stash runs out, the mice will be forced to venture out and try to find any extra scraps. Miss Frisby had 4 children. In the wild, female mice have around 7 to a dozen children. Mice can have a new litter of babies every 3 weeks. Jonathan Frisby and Mr. H's had injections so they could live longer than other mice. Ordinary mice usually live around 1 to 2.5 years. In the story, the rats helped Miss Frisby, and they loved her husband Jonathan. But in the wild, rats and mice do not get along. Rats are omnivores, which means they will kill and eat things small enough for them to catch. The main reason why mice and rats are used to test on is because their brains work in similar ways to humans. Nearly all modern medicine is tested on mice and rats before pharmacists legally sell them. Altogether, Miss Frisby and the Rats and Him was an amazing book. I loved the storyline, the characters, and I would definitely recommend reading it.